We are reading a chapter a day from this book, Here If You Need Me, written by Kate Braestrup. These are her essays, her memories of the experience of losing her husband, going to seminary and becoming a Unitarian Universalist minister and chaplain to the Maine game wardens. This is chapter 5 today. I spent my 19th year volunteering in a hospital. I wore a pink dress with a candy-striped apron, and I worked with very old people who thought I looked pretty dressed that way. My job was to hang around and talk with them if they were lonely, to brush their dentures and to rub their backs with Kerry lotion. To this day, the smell of Kerry lotion brings back the sounds and sights of the geriatric ward. What I thought I was doing was preparing for a career in medicine. I took pre-med courses at Georgetown University my first year there and thought I'd end up as an immunologist. If I look back on my work in the geriatric ward, however, it's clear that I was drawn not so much to the science of cure or even to the techniques of care, but to a communion with my patients that I as yet had no language to express. Sometimes I read from the Bible, if such was requested of me. A 103-year-old lady, Annie Payne, just loved to hear the good book read aloud. And I mean loud. I have fond memories of the senior staff physician and his coterie of medical students waiting in Annie's doorway during grand rounds, while I finished bellowing the 24th Psalm at the top of my lungs. The earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. Annie didn't particularly care what part of the Bible I read, and as I didn't know my way around it in those days, I would just let it fall open and start reading at random. There is some bizarre stuff in that book, let me tell you. And there I'd be, hollering about how Joshua kills every man, woman, and child at Jericho after the walls came tumbling down. Or how Jeremiah thinks the Israelites are whores. Or how a peevish psalmist wants God to smite somebody's hip and thigh or smash an infant's head against a rock. And there Annie Payne would be all bent up in her bed saying, "Oh, it's so true, it's so true." I found some good stories and some decent poetry in the Bible, but I didn't find God. I just loved being with Annie Payne. But not all the time. Sometimes I would just go through the motions, bellowing Isaiah, brushing her dentures, helping her onto the bedpan and off again, and I'd be thinking about something else entirely, usually guys. At other times, though, I would be doing one or another of these tasks, and all the specifics that separated me from Annie, age, race, class, state of health, who needed care and who provided it, would fall away, and we would just be there, alive together. And that would be a moment vibrating in some sweet and startling way with all the electric potential of love. And then it would be gone, as evanescent and indescribable as a dream. Eventually and peacefully, Annie Payne was gathered to her ancestors. By then, it had become clear that I lacked the stomach and the math skills for medical school, so I gave up the candy-striped apron and working in the hospital so I'd have more time for study and for being wooed by Drew. Because I did not belong to a church and would not have described myself as religious, at that time ministry did not present itself as a career possibility. By my works I shall show you my faith, says the letter of James. But Annie's Bible never happened to fall open on that page. January 1998. I heard Drew's voice in the other room. "Do you need help?" he asked me. "I'll be right there." His voice was louder, brighter than life, and for a few seconds this did not strike me as remarkable, even though it had been well over a year since Drew died. The kids were watching a videotape, a family movie shot with a camera Drew had borrowed from the state police drug unit some years back. It was the middle of the week, the middle of the day, but I didn't have the heart to remind them of the rule, although I was trying to keep up with all the rules that Drew and I made together, earnest parents, we. Whole wheat, brown rice, no sugar, no television, no videos except on weekends, and even then, only at night. It was the middle of the week, the middle of the day. The children were watching a movie that contained their father's voice. Even if I could have removed myself from bed, because I was still in bed, or rather back in bed, having not had the heart for the day at all, really, I could not make them turn off that voice. "Do you need help?" I heard him ask. I would have to be up by 6 the next morning to get to my first seminary class in Bangor by 8. The children would have to watch the clock on the microwave and leave for school when it said 7:35. I was worried about this. Zach assured me that he could lead the exodus, but he was only 11. "Yes, I need help. I can't do this, and I want you here, your body pressed to mine." Oh, that half-remembered smell, fertile as loam, as if someone opened a packet of seeds, could scatter them across our bodies. They would sprout. "Drew, I'm afraid I won't be able to make a life without you." "I'll be right there," his voice assured me. In the morning, bright and early, Wooly awakened me by biting my arm hard. "Ow!" I shrieked, and Wooly sat up on what was now her side of the bed, startled. "Oh, I'm sorry, Mama," she said with sleepy sincerity. "I dreamed you were Peter." I made it to my first class at seminary, right on time. When it was clear that I was determined to enter the ministry, my younger brother sent me a gallant, congratulatory email full of concerned fraternal inquiries about ministers' pay scales and employment benefits. It wasn't until the very end of the note that he asked the pressing question. "Dear Kate," he wrote, "you don't really believe in God, do you?" Email is a medium made for misunderstandings. I assumed my brother was being a jerk. Had he been in the room rather than on the other side of the continent, his facial expression or the angle of his head might have transferred the meaning of his words from supercilious challenge to gentle teasing, or even to earnest, yearning inquiry. But my inbox could admit nothing but words. On the other hand, this is my brother we're talking about. We're a family of snotty know-it-alls. We don't do earnest, yearning inquiry. So I'm sure I know exactly what he was thinking as he wrote those words. My sister's gone over to the dark side. How am I going to explain this to my friends? So he taps out a few innocuous questions about health insurance and retirement packages just to lower my guard. We are siblings, after all. The shields go up as soon as the handwriting on the envelope or the screen name in the inbox is recognized. But as soon as I relax, there's the kicker. "You don't really believe." "Dear Kate," he wanted to say, "now that your husband has died, now that our father has passed on, I am the eldest male in your life. It falls to me to talk you out of this religion thing before you end up in the harem of some Kool-Aid guzzling apocalyptic. It was one thing when you and Drew were attending church. That's like joining a bowling league or something. A little lowbrow, but the entertainment options up there among the double wides in the frozen north are limited. It was difficult enough to imagine you in a pew every Sunday. You were such a rotten kid. Sure, I remember the time, circa 1971, when you invented a religion. I don't know what your doctrines were, but you made all the neighborhood kids drape themselves in bed sheets. We sang, "Point Me in the Direction of Albuquerque," and I banged on the spaghetti pot with a wooden spoon. And now that I think of it, whenever we all got together to play wedding, you always wanted to officiate. None of this struck me as significant until recently, when I came across an article about a neurological disorder called temporal lobe epilepsy. This disorder induces, among other symptoms, overwhelming oceanic sensations of religious awe. Maybe, and don't take this the wrong way, I offer this with purest brotherly concern, maybe you have this disorder. Present since birth, it has expressed itself under the stress of being recently widowed. Don't panic. I'm sure this condition could be cured or controlled with medication. Visit your doctor soon, please, before you end up as Pope. LOL. Few knew that Drew had been actively considering a second career as an ordained Unitarian Universalist minister. Within a year of his death, I had matriculated at the Bangor Theological Seminary. I planned to be ordained and to serve Drew's brothers and sisters in arms as a law enforcement chaplain. Mine is a sweet little story, one that has what my journalist father used to call a great hook. When local newspapers run human interest pieces about me, the story they invariably tell is the humanly interesting tale of a plucky widow taking up her husband's standard and bravely soldiering on. It's the same tale I would tell on those not infrequent occasions when seminary professors would inquire about the nature and occasion of their students' callings. Many of my fellow students were coming to the ministry from lives marked by recent trauma or loss. They were also, and this was a relief, mostly middle-aged, second career students. Like me, they had manifold responsibilities and commitments. We proceeded so slowly and in such small batches through the course of study that I once suggested to a startled dean that we call the seminary an ovulary. The tale of the plucky widow was at least somewhat true, and I told it with conviction. So my less romantic advisors worried that, like a Hindu widow immolating herself on her husband's funeral pyre, I was sacrificing my living self for the departed dead. Or, less dramatically, that I was merely rearranging stones on the grave instead of getting on with my new, Drew-less life. I do not dismiss the notion that I might have been trying to keep Drew with me by doing his work. Drew and I, as a long-partnered pair, did in some sense become intertwined elements of one richer whole. Together, we made a family. Together, we chose our church and entered into the life of our faith community. And together, we made our commitments to it. When we discussed his plan for the future, therefore, we had actually been discussing our plan. And I would cheerfully admit mine to be a hand-me-down calling. I, a mere understudy for this God gig, were it not for an almost guilty self-awareness. I studied for the ministry because I wanted to be a minister. Blame it on the configurations of my temporal lobes. Blame it on the blue Jesus of the highway. I wanted to do the work. But are you really going to make a career out of defending those ancient fairy tales about the creator of the universe? My brother wanted to ask. God as an old granddad with a jeweler's loop screwed into one eye, adjusting the antenna on a parasitic wasp while the sun sets on the 5th day. And then, on the 6th day, with dwindling energy and some spare clay, God makes this repulsive, bipedal creature with a head like a melon, naked skin, and smelly patches of hair. I can just hear Mrs. God snickering. What is that supposed to be, darling? A self-portrait? And God, getting all offended and sort of defiant, the way we men do, huffered life into us just to show her. You know, I took a required course once called The Bible as Literature in college, so I do know something of your man Jesus, a Middle Eastern guy with a strange gleam in his eye. He'd never make it through airport security without a strip search, but nice enough once you get to know him. Still, He doesn't have the personality of a deity. WWJD, Cato. I can imagine this character bothering to do a lot of things, but making a Venus-sized planet out of incandescent gases is not one of them. LOL. New acquaintances, on discovering what line of work I'm in, will generally explain a lack of interest in church by announcing, I'm spiritual, but I'm not really religious. Trooper Drew Griffith was spiritual, which is to say that he had experiences of the numinous that were both spontaneous and deliberately cultivated. He engaged in a regular, deliberate practice within a chosen faith community in order to nurture his own spiritual development and to translate it into useful, loving social action. Drew was religious. I'm religious, but not really spiritual, I told my Christian doctrine professor. Even that probably put too fine a point on it. Mine, in reality, was a pretty plain and practical calling. I needed to do something. I highly recommend Divinity School for anyone recently bereaved. With rare exceptions, your classmates will be unbelievably nice, sensitive people. They are eager to practice their pastoral skills. So if, for example, you are suddenly moved to fits of weeping during class, your colleagues will happily abandon a discussion of Hebrew phenomes or the doctrine of predestination to put their arms around you, murmur soothing prayers in your ears, dry your tears, bring you a glass of water. And they will accept, at least for the time being, a simple answer to the profound and complex question, why are you here? I'm here because Drew isn't. Of course, seminaries are filled with survivors of trauma, my brother wanted to say. Post-traumatic stress disorder is probably the least of their worries there in the admissions office. I imagine epidemic schizophrenia, hallucinations, and a fondness for mind-altering substances, not to mention this temporal lobe epilepsy I've been reading about, are far more common. I should think, being a few sandwiches short of a picnic, neurologically speaking, is the sine qua non of religious life. Before you plunk down your seminary tuition, Kate, maybe you ought to consider whether your main man, Jesus, himself, had temporal lobe epilepsy. They didn't have magnetic resonance imaging and psychotropic meds back then, so he died on a cross in Palestine. Ever since, Jesus' followers have been trying to convince themselves that somehow, through his death, something in the fundamental nature of reality changed. But Kate, my poor neurologically impaired sister, listen to me. Nothing changed. It is as inescapable as Auschwitz, Ground Zero, Darfur. Jesus uttered the words that were his last, my God, my God. The earth seized and shuddered, but it did not break. The last day did not come and will not come, and death retains its sting. The unredeemed world continues exactly as before. Innocence is crushed in ordinary cruelty. The venom of asps remain beneath our lips. Our paths wind through ruin and misery, and the way of peace we have not learned. No matter what the Bible says, you should believe me, my sister. I'm not just a Braestrup, you know. I'm a lawyer. Perhaps 40 minutes after I had heard the news of Drew's death, I was sitting in the living room with my friend Monica when the doorbell rang. The sergeant was on the telephone, so Monica sprang to answer it. A young man stood on the front steps, clad in a spiffy dark suit, his hair neatly combed, exuding a scent of soap and virtue. Holding out a pamphlet, he beamed at Monica. Have you heard the good news? For a long second, Monica glared at him, not sure whether to punch him or laugh hysterically. She compromised by slamming the door. A few minutes later, the doorbell rang again. This time I answered it. It was my neighbor, an elderly woman I had exchanged no more than a dozen words with in the 10 years I'd lived in Thomaston. She had potholders on her hands, which held a pan of brownies, still hot from the oven. and tears were rolling down her cheeks. "I just heard," she said. That pan of brownies was, it later turned out, the leading edge of tsunami of food that came to my children and me, a wave that did not recede for many months after Drew's death. I didn't know that my family and I would be fed 3 meals a day for weeks and weeks. I did not anticipate that neighborhood men would come to drywall the playroom, build bookshelves, mow the lawn, get the oil changed in my car. I did not know that my house would be cleaned and the laundry done, that I would have embraces and listening ears, that I would not be abandoned to do the labor of mourning alone. All I knew was that my neighbor was standing on the front stoop with her brownies and her tears. She was the good news. I could see my brother striking the keys sharply. And if your God existed, I would tear out his all-seeing eyes for what he has done to you and to your children. But there is no God. Gaze up at the night and you'll stare into a vast black universe, a place in which our neurons spark to no effect, like signal flares no one will ever see. I wish I could do more, my neighbor said. And all I could think as I gazed at her shining before me in the electric air was, what more need there be on earth than this, than you? Why are you here? My seminary professors asked me. You don't really believe in God, do you? My brother wrote. Dear professors, dear brother, it is possible that God is the way Annie Payne used to lean her old head against my shoulder, trusting me as I held her on the bedpan. Drew's arms holding me in our fertile scent. Ron Dunham walking out of the woods hand in hand with a child lost, then found. It is possible that God is my neighbor with her pan of brownies, standing on my doorstep. It is entirely possible, that is, that the God I serve and worship with all my body, all my mind, all my soul, and all my spirit is love. It's enough. It's all the God I need. Well, my brother sighed into cyberspace, I shall have to comfort myself with the thought that you could be doing something even stupider with your life than ministry. You could be performing liposuction or writing political speeches or manufacturing face cream from human placenta. LOL. Then my brother shrugged, smirked, deleted everything but the salutation, the practicalities, and the question, you don't really believe in God, do you? And hit send. It's the end of chapter 5.